Good afternoon and welcome to our third and last keynote speech, after which we will have directly the closing session, so no break. We count on you. We will certainly do our best, but we count on you that we may keep an interactive feature to our afternoon. So we encourage you to post your impressions, post comments and questions, especially to our third keynote speaker on the event app, so that at the end, when we have time for questions and answers, we can address them. So help us make this interactive. We all enjoyed the morning, and we hope we can end on a similar interactive note with your help. And it is now my honor, deep honor and pleasure to introduce our final keynote speaker, Sarah Klaus, who is the director of the Early Childhood Program at the Open Society Foundations. And the work of this program, just like Sarah's entire work, is to advance the rights of children and families, especially the most disadvantaged. And they are doing this, those left behind. They are doing this by empowering parents, practitioners, professionals, and NGOs, and by building inclusive systems. Since 2006, since she is the director of the program, she has expanded their work, their original focus from Central Eastern Europe and Central Asia to include Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. Sarah is very special for ISSA and for the step-by-step organizations which are our founding members. 25 years ago, she helped launch the step-by-step program, the flagship early childhood program of the Open Society Foundations, and she was instrumental in founding ISSA as a network to support professionals and organizations in Europe and Central Asia. And after ISSA was established, which is 20 years ago, Sarah served as its director, until I had the privilege and daunting task to take over the reins from her and to benefit from her guidance and support ever since, for which I am grateful. As you can see by these figures, 25 and 20, she has been involved in the early childhood field for a while now, so she's in it for the long haul, for impact and for outcomes for the most disadvantaged children. And she has done this in a way that shows she is exceptional, creative, and an innovative thinker. As many of you who are here in the room today, I have personally learned a great deal from Sarah. I have always admired her sharp mind and her ability to see deep down to the heart of the matter, to analyze and articulate complex ideas like few people that I know. To give you an example, she sits on our board, and every time we send the document for input, it is hugely improved after Sarah has made comments on it, and we are grateful for that. Among her many other talents, she is also a great influencer. She has been successful to leverage the resources, financial and otherwise, and the strengths of the Open Society Foundations in many ways to develop the early childhood field. But she did not stop there. She has been a major catalyst in getting other foundations to invest in the field and has acted as a convener for a group of foundations around this topic. And we have invited Sarah to deliver this keynote speech, not because she is an ISSA board member, and not even because she is so closely affiliated to ISSA. We have invited her because she has contributed to building the early childhood field over such a long time, and because she is truly brilliant.
So, thank you very much for that extraordinarily warm and unexpected introduction. I'm going to dedicate this keynote actually to the 20 years of the International Step-by-Step Association, because we are here also to celebrate the anniversary of the establishment of ISSA. And you can see my talk is called 2020 Vision, the Early Childhood Field in Focus. And I've had a couple people ask me if I made a mistake with 2020, and really did I mean the year 2020? But actually, I meant 2020. 20/20 is the measurement of perfect vision. It's when you go to the optometrist and they fool around with all of those little lenses. They're trying to correct your vision to 20/20 vision so that you can see clearly. So what I'm going to try to do in this presentation is to look with clear eyes, with clear sight, together with you at where the early childhood field has come from, where we are today, and where we might be able to take it in the future. So I'll start like this. First of all, by virtue of most of us have worked in the field of early childhood for decades, I think most of us in this room would be considered, in some sense, experts. We know how to create systems that support children's well-being, and we also know how to give children the best start in life. But there are so many children right now who don't get the best start in life. So many young children are still left out. We have right now, though, a moment of unprecedented opportunity for us to create change in our field and to create change in children's lives. Today, I want to talk with you about how we can take advantage of this moment to effect all the changes we want to see. I'm going to try to do that by reminding us of some of the work of others who came before us and some of the amazing things that we in this room have already accomplished together. And I hope that by doing that, it can re-inspire us a little bit to work together and advocate for a better future. My presentation is organized around, we'll go further, a series of chapters or stories. Each of the stories or chapters forefront parents and caregivers, and they emphasize nurturing, which is, of course, the theme of this conference. They give us each of them gives us some sort of lesson about what we could do in the future to be even more successful than we are today. So I'm going to start with the first one. It's called, If You Think Great Thoughts. The pictures that you see on the screen are of my father, Dr. Marshall Henry Klaus. I knew him as the guy on the right, a pediatrician, a sometimes silly guy who loved kids and who told stories about lots of animals like Kenny the bunny and a funny goat named Elmer Meinberg. But the person I'm really going to introduce you to today is the guy on the left, the hardcore scientist. My dad had a kind of difficult start in life. Things started out maybe at the very beginning quite well. He had a good first few years of life. He was born in Cleveland to two parents who really loved him very dearly. But when he was 5, his father died, and when he was 9, his mother died. And he went to live with an uncle, and before he finished school, his uncle died. It's probably, I think, due to the fact that he had those first 5 great years that he was able to accomplish so much in his life. I think he gained a lot of resilience in those years. It's not a surprise, though, that he went to medical school because both his father and uncle had been doctors, and he admired them both very greatly. But when he got to medical school, things didn't go so well there either. He developed polio when he was treating children in a ward, and though he really wanted to be a surgeon, he had to settle for pediatrics, which was not a field that he ever intended to go into. And I want to start by telling you a story that he's told and shared with me and my siblings and the family, the rest of the family, about a time when he was in medical school, when Anna Freud came to Cleveland from London to speak to the staff of Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio. And she spoke at that time about how traumatic it was for young children during the war in England, World War II, when hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children were sent out to the countryside to live with people that they didn't know so that they could survive the war and they wouldn't be in London during the bombings. And she described how terrible it was, the kind of trauma that they kept with them throughout their lives. And she compared this to the kind of trauma that children feel in hospitals when their parents aren't there. And it made everybody in the hospital think, because when they thought about their own practices at Rainbow Babies and Children's at that time, parents could only visit on Saturdays, and they could only come for half an hour. This made a huge impact on the director of the hospital. Overnight, he changed the hospital. He opened the doors to parents, and he allowed parents in. And I think this made a huge impression on my dad, who realized that you can make big changes really fast if you aren't afraid to make big changes and you pay attention to new information. He started his career, actually, though, not in clinical practice. He started studying surfactant. So what is surfactant? Surfactant is a kind of substance in the lungs of babies that makes them very flexible. So if you have babies that are born at term have surfactant in their lungs, and their lungs are flexible and they can breathe. But premature babies, very premature babies, don't have this substance. So it was one challenge for the field to figure out how to isolate surfactant and how to give it to babies so that they could actually breathe and you could have very young premature babies survive. He managed to isolate surfactant. He became one of the first neonatologists in the field and wrote some of the first textbooks on neonatology. But he had, when he was in his 30s, what we might call an aha moment. At that time, he was the director of the neonatal nursery, neonatal intensive care nursery at Stanford University. And he noticed when he was there that that mothers, when they were able to take their babies home, had a problem attaching to their babies. They had a problem relating to their babies. Some of them had trouble feeding their babies. And he thought back to that time with Anna Freud, and he realized that those mothers had never held their babies. They'd never touched their babies. They'd never talked to their babies. Because unlike the hospitals, the neonatal intensive care units at that time were completely closed to parents. So parents were getting their children just at the moment that they were released, and it was quite difficult for them. And he became kind of obsessed with studying this. He pulled together a psychiatrist and an anthropologist, and he started to look at what happens with animals. How do animals, like goats and sheep and others, how do they attach to their babies? And how do humans, as also part of the animal kingdom, attach to their babies? And he ended up getting a grant from the National Institutes of Health to study this in depth, because you had to prove that it was better for babies if moms were with their babies, because there was a big fear that if parents were coming and going from nurseries, that you would have a transfer of bacteria, that babies would get sicker, they wouldn't get better. So he got the grant from the National Institutes of Health, allowed mothers into the nursery, and started to put together the data that needed to be put together in order to make sure that mothers and babies could be together. He remained pretty obsessed with this period of life. He got a hold of a Kodak camera, one of those cameras that gives, like, you can take a photograph every second. And he took photographs of the first 10 minutes of life. And he explored, what do mothers say to their babies when they're first born? How do mothers look at their babies? How do they hold their babies? How do they touch their babies? Is it different if the baby's premature? He started to make films about, to help hospitals. For example, he made a film to help hospitals figure out, how can you work with a mother who has a baby who has a disability? Or how can you support a mother who has a baby who's a preemie? Or how can you support a mother who has a baby who dies? He ran groups for mothers who had babies who died. He focused almost entirely the rest of his career on parents. That moment in Stanford shifted him from being somebody who was focused on surfactant, one little tiny substance in a technical thing, the technology of being a neonatologist, to focusing on the attachment issues between mothers and babies. Later in life, he founded the doula movement, which might be familiar to some of you, perhaps more in North America. The doula movement is based on the idea that having a woman having emotional support during labor and delivery supports mothers to better nurture their babies. Research shows that they have shorter labors, that they have less C-sections, that they're more attached to their babies even months later. His research on attachment contributed to the knowledge that built up the WHO's Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative, which is a protocol that puts mothers and babies together in the first moments of life in hospitals that are awarded the Baby-Friendly Award, let's say. He wrote some of the first textbooks in neonatology, and he also founded the doula movement. So what can we learn from his life and the lessons that it gives to us? Well, first of all, I think we know, or we learn, if we don't know it already, we can learn from this that parents and caregivers are irreplaceable. If we really want to help children, we need to focus on parents and caregivers. I sometimes wonder if it's the right thing for our field to focus on the word child-centered, and whether we should shift our language a little bit to always be paying attention to parents and caregivers. It might be something we want to do. Secondly, we need to be curious, innovative, look for new ideas, and even more than that, we have to be advocates to try to put things into practice. But the other message that I take from him is this: we can't be afraid. We have to be able to do things big, to think big. He had a word for this, Lollapalooza. He'd say, I want to make a Lollapalooza bet, or this is a really Lollapalooza idea. And I think we need more Lollapalooza ideas in our field. When he was dying, a couple of years ago, we had a lot of time with him when he was in hospice, and I asked him, Dad, how do you want to be remembered? And he said, if we think great thoughts, wonderful things can happen. And that's something I think we also need in our field. We need to imagine the world that we want to create in order to be able to create it. The second chapter today, in my story today, or the second story, is called Learning Begins at Birth. So we might take it for granted right now that early childhood is important in the international development field, but it really wasn't always like that. In fact, after World War II, when the major agencies were established, the World Bank, UNICEF, all the UN agencies, etc., the main thing on the agenda for young children was actually survival. If you look at this chart in the 1950s, you can see that 1 in 5, or in some cases 1 in 3, children were dying before the age of 5. But that shifted over the next 40 or 50 years, and it shifted because healthcare improved, sanitation improved, living standards improved, and probably most importantly, vaccines and antibiotics came into play and really led to many more children surviving the first 5 years of life. It wasn't until the 1980s and the 1990s that a man who some of you may know his name, Bob Myers, started to think about early child development, to move away from survival and to start to think about development. Bob Myers at that time, I think I have a better slide, he started to pull together the arguments about why we should start focusing on early child development. And he wrote a book in 1995 called The 12 Who Survive. The thesis of the book, which is on the left, is that now 12 out of 13 children are surviving. So what happens to them? You know, what's their future going to be like? We need to focus on that, and we need to focus on young children now to ensure that they have good lifelong trajectories. So he started to work with a number of people. I'm going to list some of the names. You may know some of them: Fred Wood, Michael Gibbons, Sheldon Schaefer, and to work with a number of agencies like the Ford Foundation, Bernard Van Leer Foundation, USAID, UNICEF, Save the Children. They started to fund this bringing together of evidence. So the first opportunity they had to move early childhood development onto the international agenda was the World Conference on Education, which was held, Education for All, which was held in Jamtien, Thailand in 1990. And this actually was the first conference at all on education globally. The conference was preceded by a number of consultations. So I guess researchers went out and talked to everyday people about what they wanted out of education. And I was very interested last week when I was in New York and I was speaking with Cassie Landers. She told me that actually many, many people reflected that what they really wanted in education was childcare. And I think that's a very interesting finding and one we need to pay attention to, because childcare is bigger than children. It's bigger than education. It's about parents being able to work and families being able to thrive. So they used this information, those that went to advocate to get early childhood on the development agenda. And they pulled together lots of information, and they did all sorts of in-the-background advocacy, behind-the-scenes advocacy. And they were supremely successful. They managed to get into the final framework for action very, very important words for our field: learning begins at birth. With those words, I think they moved early childhood from being just something that was going on. Maybe individuals like my dad or others were having particular adventures in early childhood, but it moved it onto the global international development agenda. And it went even further, because it stated that learning, which begins at birth, can take place in families, it can take place in communities, it can take place in centers, and that it should prioritize the poorest, the most disadvantaged, and disabled children. It's something we need to remember as we move forwards. If we look forwards over the next 20 to 30 years in the field, what we find are a number of publications that start to shape the world of early childhood intellectually. I'm only going to mention a few of them, and I would encourage you to use the app if you think I've left something out, because I'm only going to mention 3 and there's a whole bunch of them, to use the app to put up things that you think should also be included. But the first one I want to mention is From Neurons to Neighborhoods. This was put out by the US Academy of Sciences in 2000, and it changes the dialogue completely because it brings us the language of brain development and science, and it moves early childhood from a discussion about childcare or kindergartens into a much broader realm of science, society, and policy. Another publication that has great, let's say, resonance for us, or great resonance for us, particularly at the Open Society Foundations, is General Comment number 7 on implementing child rights in early childhood education. So coming 15 years after the Convention on the Rights of the Child, this document emphasizes what's particularly important when we think about very young children's rights. And I think where it's a little bit perhaps disruptive, but at least really specific, is that it tells us that young children have feelings and ideas and perspectives that we need to respect. It reminds us that young children are not lesser human beings or don't have lesser rights just because they're smaller people or they can't stand up for or represent themselves and represent their own rights in all cases. If we move forward, you can see I'm going very fast. I'm going to mention also the Lancet articles, 3 series of articles that appeared between 2007 and 2016. These articles, I think, are crucial because they tell us what the scope of the problem is. They tell us that 250 million children are at risk of not reaching their full developmental potential because of either stunting or poverty. And further than that, the latest version, the latest edition, or the latest series of articles defines for us nurturing care. And it tells us that nurturing care, sorry, I need my glasses here. Right. It reminds us that the single most powerful context for nurturing care is the immediate home and care settings for young children. Moving forwards, no, I don't want to move forwards. I'm going to stay there. Right. So the last slide that I wanted to show you actually is a slide about the nurturing care framework that the World Health Organization just put out last year and presented to all of the ministers of health. Nurturing care takes the ideas from the Lancet articles and makes quite clear to all of the ministers of health that early childhood needs to be holistic, that it focuses not only on education or early learning and health, but also on nutrition, safety and security, and responsive caregiving. So what lessons can we take from this idea that, we moved from not being on the agenda at all to being front and center on WHO's agenda, perhaps UNICEF's agenda, even the World Bank agenda? What do we take from this experience? Well, I think, again, there's an emphasis on the importance of parents. It comes out in the nurturing care framework. If we didn't realize it initially with the message about childcare, we certainly know it now from the science presented in the Lancet and through the nurturing care framework and through, sorry, I didn't move forwards here, through the Sustainable Development Goals, which contain a number of goals that I'm not going to go through them all. I think you've probably all seen slides like this that demonstrate that early childhood is embedded in any number of the Sustainable Development Goals. But these development goals also contain an indicator or also lead to an indicator that all children should be developmentally on track. So these goals really refocus the field on children's development from what came before. And there's the nurturing care framework. See, it was hiding somewhere. So what can we take from this history, this sort of brief history? So the first is that we need to support parents and caregivers. But secondly, I think we need to frame our work quite broadly as part of global movements around science, human development, and human rights, if we want to be heard. I would add economics to this, though I haven't mentioned it. I think all of us know the economic arguments that also underlie early childhood development. But I want to challenge us also with a question, like I did before, about the word child-centered. I want to ask you, Did this process of getting on the global agenda and on national agendas take too long? I actually think it did. I think we had information many, many years ago that should have convinced us and that we should have used to convince the field to pay attention to young children, perhaps decades ago. I think we need better ways to share information, innovations, and lessons learned. The field is much, much bigger than it was in the 1980s when Bob Myers could just pull a few people together in New York and talk about early childhood. We have to find faster, more efficient ways to generate and share new thinking and put it into action. So my third story, chapter 3, is called Who Says We Can't Change the World? And I hope a few of you are smiling out there, because anyone who participated in the step-by-step program knows that that was our rallying cry. That's what held us together. And it certainly wasn't modest, but it was very ambitious. So what is step-by-step that people have talked about? What is the step-by-step program that people have talked about throughout at various points in this conference? And where did ISSA come from? Well, step-by-step is, as Liana mentioned, the early childhood program, the flagship early childhood program that the Open Society Foundations launched in 1994. They came about because our founder, George Soros, heard somebody talking about brain research, and he became absolutely convinced that he could no longer really support the development of open democratic societies if he was just giving scholarships to people in higher education. He had to start earlier. He had to focus on how to build democratic societies by building children and by focusing on parents and how they function in democratic societies. So the program started like that, and he made a huge commitment. From the start, he said he would offer $100 million or more to support initiatives in this area. And he gave that figure to my boss at the time, Liz Laurent, who was overwhelmed and who tried to figure out what she could do that would be really beneficial in Central Eastern Europe and Eurasia, which is where the Soros foundations were operating. We had foundations in almost every country at that time. And she took her inspiration actually from the Head Start program. Let's see if we can find the Head Start program. There's the Head Start program. So the Head Start program, I think, was a great inspiration for the step-by-step program. And it was an inspiration because Head Start has always put young children and has always put parents first. Head Start builds off the ideas of Yuri Bronfenbrenner, his socio-ecological framework for human development. And Head Start always has taken a broader look at early childhood. So Head Start programs from the start have supported parents to get the right to vote and to register to vote. Head Start programs have supported parents to finish their education if they dropped out of education, to apply for employment, some of them even working in kindergartens. Head Start, though you might think of it as an early learning or a child care program, is also a program about children's health. And those ideas that the most vulnerable children need the most comprehensive programs, those are the ideas that we took to Eastern Europe. And the aim of the program really was to work in programs in existing kindergartens in Central and Eastern Europe that were really struggling and suffering because of all of the economic, political, and social, what would we say? Constraints. Constraints, I would even say, challenges of the 1990s. So step-by-step brought these new concepts to the region. And I'm going to go back here and just page through and look at my notes for a moment so I can say this clearly. So our program started in 15 countries at the beginning, but eventually extended to 29. The idea was to transform practice in these kindergartens so that there would be a greater focus on parents, on critical thinking. We would focus on the skills children need to flourish in a democracy. Ideas like making choices, taking responsibility, appreciating different viewpoints, celebrating diversity. All of these things became part of a methodology that was based around learning through play. US trainers from the Head Start program, in the first year there were 30, 2 were matched each of the 15 countries, came over and trained the first cohort of Eastern European and Central Asian experts who started the program. Parent coordinators were hired in each preschool. Teaching assistants were hired in each preschool. We renovated preschools. We bought materials. We did all sorts of things in that first year. let's see. Yeah. And over time, the program grew. It grew enormously. And in fact, it was only supposed to last 2 years. I have to tell you that at the beginning. We were going to work in 15 kindergartens in each country, in 15 countries, in 5 to 10 kindergartens in each country. We were going to transform practices in those kindergartens and link with teacher training institutes, and that was going to be the whole story. But actually, over the last 20 years, we ended up working training hundreds of thousands of teachers, reaching millions of children, and extending the program. We started to work in primary schools because that's where children were going to go. We started working in infant and toddler programs because infants and toddlers were often in the preschool buildings too, and we weren't doing anything for them. We started to work with institutions of higher education to try to change pre-service education. We registered courses so that they could be part of the official in-service education system. We developed standards, educational standards, trainings for trainers, trainings for mentors, anti-bias training for teachers, social justice trainings. We focused on bringing children with disabilities, Roma children, other ethnic minorities into classrooms. And I guess after 5 years, we realized that the program wouldn't survive if it stayed inside our foundation, inside the Open Society Foundations. If we really wanted to make this sustainable, we had to spin it off, in a way. We had to help the programs that were based at the Open Society Foundations register and launch in every single country an early childhood network or NGO that was focused on professional educators, on early childhood educators and others in the field. And this was another huge effort. Can you imagine? All of these people who were actually early childhood educators were asked to lead the establishment of organizations, something which they had never done before. And those organizations together decided that they wanted to stay in a coalition. They wanted to stay in a group. They wanted to be part of a network. At that time, there were 25 step-by-step programs, and those 25 members came together to found ISSA. It happened in October 1998 in Dubrovnik. We came together and took a decision to establish ISSA, and we elected a small group of people to figure out how to do it. A few months later, in a castle in Hungary, I think many of us will remember debating for an entire day with 2 lawyers the details of the statutes of ISSA, and then registering them in the Netherlands, which was the country we selected as the place where we wanted to establish ISSA. For those of us who were part of this incredible project, bringing Head Start to Europe, growing step-by-step nationally and regionally, and then establishing ISSA, it was much, much more than a job. It was our life. We poured ourselves into it, intellectually, personally, passionately. We created a collaborative space where it was okay to dream big dreams, where it was okay to share successes, and where it was even okay to share failures and to be curious. It nourished us. At meetings that we organized first at the Open Society Foundations and later at meetings at ISSA, we were refreshed and inspired. Those of us in the room who are connected with Step by Step and ISSA, you did this. You've become the voice of the region and represent this region in the Global Early Childhood Development Network and in the community that's formed now. But now it's not just the step-by-step members. There are over 90 organizations in East and West Europe that have become part of what started out as through the step-by-step program. And I think the ISSA of today is an organization that stands really in this region for quality in early childhood, for equity and diversity in early childhood, for collective action and for social justice. ISSA today brings hopefully some of that inspiration and even some of the warmth and cozy atmosphere that we experienced in the early days to meetings like this. But I think what ISSA offers us is some of the same messages that we heard in the other stories. Focus on parents, think big, and collaborate. Not everyone who was here in 1998 is here today at this ISSA meeting, but I would like to ask, before I launch into some comments about the future, I'd like to ask all of those who are here representing step-by-step programs to stand up so that we can give you a round of applause. there you are, all the NGOs. Some have changed your names, some have changed your logos, but at the time ISSA was established, there were, I think, 30 of you. And there's ISSA, with a picture that many of us will remember from Bosnia. So what comes next? Where are we going? How can we use this moment of opportunity? Well, I have some predictions about what might be in the future, and probably you do too. I believe that early childhood education in the next 10 years is going to become a statutory part of every education system. Right now, about 70% of all children have at least 1 year of preschool education before they enter primary school. If we look more broadly at early childhood education in general, it's only about 50% of children that have more than 1 year of early education. So I think to get between 50 or 70 and 100%, it's going to take a huge expansion of the workforce. And we're going to have to work as a community all together to make sure that that happens, and that that happens in a way that quality is guaranteed. But I believe the Me Too movement is going to influence our field. We're going to have to start thinking about gender equity. We're going to have to start thinking about childcare. If women are going to work in the workforce, we need to think about beyond programs that focus on home visiting or half-day preschool programs. We're going to have to think about childcare programs that last during the hours that people are actually working. We should think about the rights of labor rights for everybody. Do people have parental leave, maternity leave? We need to think about also the rights of those people who work with young children and their status. We need to think about non-formal labor, all the domestic laborers that are working to provide childcare and what their rights are in the field. Michael was right that we're going to have to focus in the future on creating worlds and environments for children, and that this will be impacted or triggered by climate change, by air quality, I think also by the obesity crisis, and by the need for creating places for children to play physically instead of online. Brain development, technology, genetics will lead to all kinds of new interventions and inventions. I think some will be really positive and some may be really scary. But there's one challenge that we've been working on for years that we need to keep fighting for. We have to continue, no matter how challenging the politics of the times are, to continue to fight for equity. We have to promise ourselves that we will leave no one behind. Sorry, I was supposed to show you this climate change and the Me Too movement and brain development. There you go. So we need to leave no one behind. When the Open Society Foundation started working in early childhood, you can see from the step-by-step program, we took a very broad approach. We focused on education broadly. But in the last 4 or 5 years, we've started to focus and target our work on 3 populations: Roma children, migrants and refugees, and children with developmental delays and disabilities. And the reason for that is that we believe if we don't give extra attention to those groups as a field and also as a foundation, that they will be left behind. But there are groups and organizations that are working to change that. Moving Minds Alliance on the left, I need to give a lot of credit to the Bernard Van Leer Foundation for starting a movement in the early childhood field and for bringing foundations together to advocate for changing permanently, hopefully, how young children are addressed or how children are not addressed in humanitarian crises. Roma Early Years Networks, can you raise your hands or can you wave if you're from a Roma Early Years Network? We have a lot of members here of Roma Early Years Networks. There are 11 established in different countries and an international network established at the International Step-by-Step Association, all devoted to increasing the Roma workforce and empowering educators and others who work with Roma in the early childhood field. And we also have the Early Childhood Development Task Force, a task force that's focused very much on young children and increasing services and policies for young children with disabilities and developmental delays. I wanted to highlight for you and tell you about a movement that many of you can join as well. Next year, we hope to share with you a large initiative that we're funding in Europe to advocate for inclusion and prioritization of the most vulnerable children. Our aim, collectively, through Eurochild and with the International Step-by-Step Association, the European Public Health Association, the Roma Education Fund, UNICEF, and others, is to influence the next European Union budget so that it includes adequate resources and generous funding to support young children, particularly those who are most disadvantaged, and to ensure that they grow up in a better Europe. We invite you to join us. The coalition is just starting to form. I want to close with a key message for you, to remind us that we have and we can create the tools and knowledge to give all children the best start in life and to leave no one behind. But we have to do, in order to do this, we have to think big. We have to focus on parents and caregivers, and we have to be a better coordinated army of activists and advocates in order to put our ideas into action. We have to nurture what Joan Lombardi has called the roads and arteries of the field. These are the networks and the exchange forums like ISSA, but also like our colleagues and partner forums in the Middle East, in the Asia-Pacific region, and in Africa, as well as the new global network, the Early Childhood Development Action Network. Colleagues from all these networks are here with us today because they share our mission. And we need to use these networks not only for information exchange, but also to put early childhood, or to keep early childhood, I would say, in social and political agendas. I hope next year we'll have the opportunity to meet in Belgrade this time. But in between, let's each of us commit to being active members and contributors in at least one network. Let's promise ourselves that we'll innovate, that we'll share knowledge and expertise, and that we'll learn from what's working, and that we'll share what's not working. Let's commit to focusing on parents, on communities, and to standing up for those children who are left out. I think we need to think big. Can you all say Lollapalooza? Lollapalooza? Okay, I think if you can say it, you can do it. So until Belgrade, thanks very much for listening to my speech.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We invite you now to use the app if you have a comment or a question for Sarah. There was already one. Sarah, Deepa Grover reminded us about the Heckman curve that gave a milestone boost to ECD. The return on investment argument presented by a hardcore economist gave the ECD community a powerful advocacy tool. So thank you. This was in response to your invitation of mentioning other important movements and resources. So we can use a few minutes perhaps for you to think and post a comment or anything you wish to share, an impression, a question. But in the meantime, Sarah, can I ask you, what is your next Lollapalooza?
I don't know. You know, we're making a strategy now in our department. We'll have to put forward new ideas by 2021. And I think we're open to hearing from you about all of your new ideas. I know we're looking at ideas around childcare. What's that? Go to the middle.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm here. I think we're looking at potential areas of work around childcare and non-formal labor. I think that's interesting for us. I think the Roma imperative remains crucially important for the Open Society Foundations, particularly Roma young children as well.
Great. Yeah. And what do you think, in case our guests need a bit more time to think of a question if they have one, what do you think should be the next new area that foundations might explore to push forward the ECD agenda? Other foundations, that some are in the room, not necessarily that OSF might get involved, but what do you think about the role of philanthropy? As you were saying in your speech, perhaps it took too many years to really get where we are, and let us not let more years to go by. We still have a lot to do to bring more investment in services and more, even more attention. So what do you think foundations could do more?
I think actually we need a commitment from foundations to support these roads and networks at the beginning, because I think unless we can be more activist and more collective in our actions, we won't be able to push forward ideas. We're not going to be able to sort of shake out ideas to figure out what works, to learn from what doesn't work. So I think foundations should be supporting networks. I think we have these conversations amongst foundations, but I think also that foundations need to be able to, or will be investing in many of the things that you saw on that slide earlier, and those are crucially important as well: air quality, climate change, children's environments, brain research, and all of these areas as well.
Yes, and do you have a suggestion for ISSA? What should be our next Lollapalooza or the other regional networks?
Work together and leave no one behind. I think those would be my two messages. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. I invite now to the floor, and I introduce to you Henriette Heimgartner, who is the co-founder and director of the Berlin Early Childhood Institute for Quality Development. And she is also a board member of ISSA, and on behalf of the board, she will make some closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you. Does this work? Thank you, Liana. And, well, thank you, Sarah. She's no longer here on the stage, but I had the privilege, actually, of following some of this, what Sarah was saying. I'm very emotional about this all of a sudden. Okay. No, because I think really that ISSA had made really, really, really great strides and great steps. And it's not only step by step, but is step by great steps. And I think many of you here in the room have contributed to this. And this is really, really, really a great achievement. Nobody could know in the beginning that it would become what it has become today. So thank you very much also, Sarah, and also Liana. Well, I will come to this. Well, yes, I'm on behalf of the board, of the ISSA board, I was asked to say a few words also about this conference, about these last 3 days. For many of us, it was 3 days. And the theme was nurturing, and I think the nurturing we had seen in many, many occasions. I mean, all the sessions I have been in, showed how much, nurturing was going on in the programs that were presented, in the ideas that were presented, and in the approaches. So thank you very much for this. And actually, all the sessions I think have nurtured us all really here in the room, and I think we come away with a lot of new ideas, what we could change, what we could improve, and where we could set the next steps. And actually, while ECD, early childhood development, is actually a responsibility of all, and we have seen this also from the presentation from the keynote of Sarah, at the same time we have also heard this morning, particularly by the keynote of Michael from the Bernard van Leer Foundation, that this field is not yet come to an end. It's actually so much broadened if you think about, all the issues that he talked about this morning, about the quality of air, the quality of streets, of transport, and all of this. And I think it gave many of us ideas of where we have to think really in a way beyond education in order to make to create really thriving and inspiring environments for children. So this is something I think that will be more and more on the agenda over the next years. So this nurturing goes much beyond, the realm of education, and I think this also points to the fact that Sarah also mentioned towards the end of her talk, that we have to identify and to be working on new partnerships and on new collaboration efforts, because there are so many more players and workers and shapers in the field that most of us come from the educational field, have to talk to co-create and to co-construct our steps that we are going to take in the future. And I'm pretty sure also that ISSA is going towards that road, and that ISSA will be carrying forward also some of these ideas that we have been talking about now. And so really a big thank you to all of you, and a big thank you to Sarah and to Liana, but I will come back to this a little bit later. So I give the floor to Liana now. Oh, Mihaela, of course, Mihaela. Sorry, Mihaela.
Yes,
it's
no
you now.
No problem. Thank you. No, these are for you. I would like to have your attention only for, it's not a speech, it's just a message that our friend Frank Oberklaid, who could not stay for today, wanted to share with you at the very end of the conference itself. For you, those of you who do not know Frank Oberklaid, he is the Foundation Director of the Centre for Community Child Health at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, Australia, and also Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Melbourne. He's a renowned expert at the international level coming from the health sector, so he's a pediatrician whom you might have seen actually online in the mini parenting masterclasses of the UNICEF's Early Moments Matter that are quite inspirational and little pills of masterclasses that could be helpful in pre-service or in-service training very much. He's also an advocate for community of local platforms, community platforms that unite services and sectors for providing a safe map and also safe net of services for young children and families. We asked him to share a few thoughts as he has been contributing to the pre-conference workshop that some of you may have attended as other pre-conference workshops that were organized in the day before the conference. The Nurturing Care for Early Childhood Development in the 21st Century, organized with our colleagues from UNICEF, ECARO, and World Health Organization. And well, he participated also the entire day yesterday. So let's just hear his thoughts.
I'm so pleased to have attended this conference, and I'm really sorry that I've had to leave a little early and haven't been able to be with you for the whole 2 days. But I've learned a lot these 2 days. I've been particularly pleased about the theme of the importance of the environment, because we can't do much to change biology of children, but we can do a lot to make sure that young children grow up in a thriving environment. What we mean by that, of course, is the family situation, and many people here are direct service providers. They support parents. We talk about services that then support families. Many people here are service providers or managers of services. And we talk about the policy environment as well, and all three things are particularly important. And I've just been so pleased to see that broad horizon, that broad lens to look at child development, because we used to think about it just in the child, just in the early education for the child. And it's really important for us to understand that the whole broad scope of the environment is important to make a difference to young children. What's been really interesting is people from so many diverse countries, so many diverse backgrounds, so many diverse institutions, all coming together around that same theme and learning from each other and networking. You could just see at the tea breaks and all the introductions taking place all of the time and the workshops that I went to, such diverse backgrounds, such diverse professional experiences, but all understanding the importance of the expanded environment for young children. There'll be people that'll take away from this conference an understanding of individual programs to support families or parents or children. There are those that'll take away the importance of integration of services, like the workshop that I just participated in. And there will be people that'll take away some very interesting tips and recommendations about how to influence policy. But the energy that these three themes have generated in coming together has just been a highlight of the conference. So congratulations again, and I'm sorry I can't be with you until the very end.
Thank you to Frank, and hope that you have also enjoyed listening to him. Well, as we are really coming to an end, we also have thought that perhaps when you go back and you will have to say where you have been, so what was the conference about, how many people were there, were they from how many countries, you might not necessarily know exactly the answer. So we have prepared some polls for you, so please look at your phones and let's see. if you can answer to some of the questions that we have prepared for you. So, how many participants you think that there were here at the ISSA conference in 2019 in Leiden? Did it go over? 380, 400, I don't know. 350, 380. 320, 350. Let's see. I don't know. Okay, the votes are coming up. Still time. Little time. And the correct answer is 395. The second question that we wanted to ask you now, because you have participated in many conference sessions, and you have seen also in the program that there were lots of participants coming from many countries. How many countries do you think that were represented at the ISSA conference? And you may choose between 50, 55, so you see that we don't go lower than 50. 55, 60, 60, 65. Okay, still counting. You're getting closer. Okay, and the correct answer is between 60 and 65. Yes. Well, the last question. And I think that this is really important to all of us, not just for us. Which strand was the most, no, it's not the last, it's the last but one. Which strand was the most featured throughout the conference session? We had 3 strands. The first one is about the home environment. The second one was about nurturing environment in services. And the third one was about nurturing environments in communities and cities. Which one was mostly featured in the conference session? I see that there are not much of that many doubts. Let's see. Okay. And the correct answer is strand 2, which kind of connects a bit the dots, as Sarah was mentioning, that perhaps we should focus more on parents and home environment, because it's true, many of those of you who proposed conference sessions were addressing strand 2 more than the other 2 strands. And yes, communities and cities were on the second place. Now it really is the last question. And I think that we really would like you to share with all of us your overall impression about the conference sessions. We ask about the conference sessions because most of the time, actually, we have spent participating in the workshops of our colleagues. And it's very important for all of us also to know how we can do better next time by listening to those that have participated in these sessions. So, overall, how you will be rating the quality of the sessions that you have participated in, from 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest score and 5 being the highest score. It's an overall evaluation. We will send a separate evaluation, more concrete and more detailed, but this one is just, for us to leave the conference with the kind of big picture of the conference. I think there's no correct answer here. So we will wait until we really reach the maximum of number of votes. I suppose this is it. Thank you so much. This means that next year we would need to have more than 50-something percentage that vote. Could you just go back? Could you show it again or not? Yes, it would be interesting to see the results of the poll. So next year, we hope, we will repeat this next year, and we would be very curious to see if we have managed to get beyond the 50, beyond the 50% of rate for 4, which is a good one, but especially to increase the 16% for those that have rated with the highest score. However, we are glad that we are having a 0.9 with a very low score. So thank you. I think this was also for all of us to share the quality of the sessions that we have prepared together during the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mihaela, also for pushing us in being self-reflective and working on self-improvement. She does this a lot in our work. And before we close, we saw the number of countries, and now let's see the representation on continents. I was very happy that Sarah mentioned we have here colleagues from the other regional networks and also from ECDAN and international partners. But I would like to show now this representation, and as you can see, we remain focused on Europe, largely, Europe and Central Asia. And we are very, very glad to have also participants from so many other corners of the world. We are keen on having this cross-regional and cross-continental learning opportunity. And we are very grateful that some of you traveled really far to be here with us, and we only hope it has been worthwhile. Now, before closing these very intense 3 days, as Henriette reminded us, I would like to ask you to join me in a brief moment of meditation. Some of you may know I'm also a yoga teacher, and I would like to invite you to sit up straight in your seat, but comfortable and relaxed. So not tense, but as straight as you can. Close your eyes if you wish to join me in this moment. And as you know that we have chosen the ISSA logo to represent the dandelion seeds as a symbol. And some of us might see it as a weed, and some of us might see it as a symbol of good ideas, ideas that need to be spread. So now, before we start our meditation, I invite you to take in a deep breath and let it out with a Let me hear that And as you sit with your eyes closed, think of one idea you picked up at this conference that you would like to go home with and spread to contribute to more nurturing environments for young children. What is that one idea that you would like to take back with you and spread? And still with your eyes closed, with the eyes of your mind, see how that idea will take shape in reality. And remember to breathe in the meantime and visualize it. Visualize details of it. Who is in that image? In what environment is that image? And now you may open your eyes and let us blow all these good ideas out with the wind so that they can all become reality. And in order for some of those seeds to flower, we actually have chosen to blend into the save the date announcement you probably found in your conference bags. I hope you did not misplace it. Embedded in it, blended into it rather, are some beautiful wild flowers. And we urge you to go home and put this simply in soil, in a pot, on your windowsill, or if you're fortunate to have a garden or a spot nearby where you may wish to see wildflowers grow. We have some pictures of wildflowers planted from the Ghent conference, and we were delighted to see them in many parts of the world. So do send us some photos if your flowers will grow. And we are very happy to share with you the date and location for our next year conference in October in Belgrade, in Serbia, which we are very proud to co-host with our member organization there, CIP, Center for Interactive Pedagogy in Serbia. I invite them to wave if they're in the room. Yes, there they are, and all the other persons from Serbia that happen to be with us, from UNICEF and other organizations and elsewhere. And we are delighted that in addition to CIP, we partner with OSF and the LEGO Foundation, and hopefully with other partners, including UNICEF Serbia, the city of Belgrade. Yes, we do wish to keep this tradition to partner with the municipality and also with others. We hope that you will join us there. And now for some thanks that are due. You can imagine that putting together such an event takes a lot of work. And we also were fortunate to count on wonderful partnerships. First of all, strong partnership with Bernard van Leer Foundation and the Open Society Foundation. So thank you. The Utopa Foundation, WHO, UNICEF, Oak Foundation, the City of Leiden, Leiden University, Yes Ireland, the Two Lilies Foundation, and ICDI as well. Most thanks need to go to speakers and presenters in the plenaries and in the concurrent sessions. You have been the backbone of the conference, and without you, our conference would have been an empty shell and some toys on the stage. So thank you to all the presenters and speakers. We have been helped by many volunteers, some from Leiden, and some who were actually supported by the Two Lilies Foundations to travel all the way from Haifa, where they are enrolled in the MA program there. So all the volunteers, please stand up so we may thank you. If you happen to be in the room. And we have been supported and assisted by a conference organizing agency called 7 Tips, who I invite to come on stage if they're in the room. And in the meantime, if they are in the room and they can come, they are probably not in the room, but we will thank them nevertheless. I wanted to share with you that 3 years ago, we held our conference in Vilnius, Lithuania, and they did such an amazing job that we've been hiring them for Ghent and now for Leiden, and I'm sure we'll hire them for Belgrade as well. And I wanted to share this because probably some of you thought it's a bit dodgy that you're sending your registration fee to an account in Lithuania. But now you know it was a safe thing to do. And the biggest thanks from me go to the dream team from ISSA, my colleagues, whom I invite to join me here on stage so that we can thank them properly. And Mihaela is the mastermind of content for this conference, and Eva is the mastermind for logistics. I hope they're in the room. We have Zorica, Konstantina, Emily, Federico, Alyosha, Francesca, Ning, Winifred, and Zsuzsa. Please join me on stage. No one is coming from this, please. Yes. Ming is coming. Why don't you go there, sir? So, thank you so much. I can only share that for me, it is a joy to come to work, and that is because of the people we're working with, and everything they do with passion. And I can share, as Sarah said, it is not just a job. It is something into which we pour our hearts, our values, our dreams, and our efforts. Also efforts. So thank you so much for making all of this possible. And now, in order to all of us to relive some moments of the conference, we prepared a little surprise for you.
Childhood today is not about business as usual. It's not your grandmother's field anymore, even if I'm a grandmother. It is really about addressing new challenges and building new champions, unlikely champions from other fields.
My dream is to prove that if we can actually start connecting all the different players in the right way with the right KPI, we will make it happen. It is not impossible. But the question is, who is going to take the responsibility?
For us, a nurturing environment is a safe space for children where they can fully develop their unique potential and never feel any judgment or pressure from the people around them.
Work with the young fathers that you can reach in your community or in your program. Find out, understand what their needs are, what motivates them, what challenges they have. Maybe reach out a little bit to their wives as well, and engage them in the planning process.
One of the issues that has come up since we started asking this question is the quality of the air. If a caregiver and a toddler can get around, everybody can get around.
A nurturing environment means to me a place where a child can play, can explore, and can live a happy life.
Participation in ECC in Europe depends a bit on how well you are already integrated. And it could also mean that if you are not that well integrated, the system is not appealing to you.
A nurturing environment for me means that a place where a child is happy, is safe, and can discover new things.
Early learning, nutrition, health, security and safety.
A place where children can safely interact with each other and with teachers and their parents.
We need to be curious, innovative, look for new ideas, and even more than that, we have to be advocates to try to put things into practice.
As you can see, we have had the privilege of a wonderful, talented cameraman. And also in Lithuania, we started to work with the cameraman and photographer. We also have great photos on our Facebook page. Kristijonas and Sigita, who happen to be married with each other. And we, as you can see, their work is so beautiful that we actually bring them to be with us from Lithuania. They've been with us in Ghent as well. And I want to share that Sigita actually skipped her MA graduation only to be with us. Now, her topic is management of education, so she really wanted to join also for the content of the conference. I want them to stand up or wave to us if they happen to be in the room so we can thank them. There is Sigita, there's Kristijonas, and thank you. Thank you. And we will share all of this on the conference website and also on the app, uploading the photos. So we hope to see you next year, and we look forward to having you together with us in Belgrade next year. Thank you.
Sorry, Liana, but I will have the last word of this conference.
You're a board member, so it's okay. Yes.
Exactly. That's why I abuse of my position. No, there have been so many thank yous, and really also from the board side, a great thank you to the ISSA team. But actually, we as a board, we also want to thank you. And now I have to handle something. I hope I can.
Oh, my goodness.
Because we are in the land of flowers, as you can see. They are the most beautiful flowers in the Netherlands. And we managed to get you this. And without you, you know, ISSA would also not be what it is, you know.
I'm so touched. Thank you so much. Thank you. Let us take us a picture. Stay with me, please. Stay with me for a photo, and we can. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.